All right, so this is my esteemed panel. So I'm going to start here. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself? Then we'll go to Paul, Eugene, Rudy. Just introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll get into the questions.
Hi, everybody. Mike Peckham. Reason I'm here is because I implemented a blockchain when I was working at Health and Human Services, and thought it would be fun to come and talk about that just a little bit. And I'll just pass it on over to Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Dowding. I'm a volunteer co-chair of the board of directors for Government Blockchain Association and the deputy assistant janitor to Gerard. I'm also co-founder and head of design for L4S Core, and we have a differentiating layer 1 protocol called Tapestry X.
Hello, my name is Eugene Morozov, and I'm a fashion director at GBA. I was also very lucky to have been invited to contribute to the report, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results, the adoption, the benefits from all the organizations. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Rudy Livingston. I'm a newcomer to GBA, and I've enjoyed getting to know everybody here. My history, I've spent about 25 plus years in local government. And so I've come on board as the local government expert, if you will. And we've been actually working on a project that we're in the design stage right now for implementation of blockchain within the county. I work for Utah County. I'm the deputy director, not even close, deputy chief auditor of the Utah County. And so I'm involved with the finance side of the world.
Awesome. All right. So let me start with this first question, and that is what this report that we just published, right, which is preventing fraud, waste, and abuse with blockchain in government. What was it? What was it that started that? What was the genesis? Why did that thing get started? And then why did you personally get involved? So, Michael, I'll start with you.
So my battle with fraud, waste, and abuse started a long time ago. I worked in accounting for many, many years in the federal government. So voila, it's on the agenda right now for the administration. I got involved with the GBA years ago. Gerard, I met you, 2017, 2018. And it was interesting because blockchain was at its infancy, I would say, for broad adoption. And I loved the idea of an immutable ledger coming from the perspective of an accountant. I don't necessarily call myself accountant, but I've held a lot of accounting roles. That led to more and more engagement with folks. A lot of them are here today on how blockchain can be used, not just from a financial perspective, because when I went and I talked about blockchain, it was specifically, oh, you're doing something with Bitcoin. What is that? And the federal government did not like that at all. So when I was explaining to folks that it could be used in other ways to fight fraud, waste, and abuse, they were a little shocked. And what we did was we had to do, within federal grants management, there's a pre-award risk assessment that's required on every grant that goes out the door. I will say that those are done very subjectively, and they are not, I would say, very good. I'll just put it out there. There's still a lot of fraud in grants. Everybody is aware of that. Everybody just saw what happened in Minnesota. And so we were starting off on something new, a new way to tackle this fraud, waste, and abuse problem. And so we developed a risk assessment tool. And the interesting thing that we did was we took an entity. Each time an entity was assessed, we would drop that assessment onto a blockchain. Then you would get point-in-time looks at that entity over a period, and you could see if they had shrinking or growing financials. You could see if they had problems with their audits. You could get this full picture instead of just a point in time. And when I started talking about that more broadly, people's eyes opened up and they said, oh, there's a broader use for blockchain. So I've stayed in touch with Gerard, met these great gentlemen on the panel, and I want to continue to say, hey, we can use blockchain. It's an immutable ledger. It's great for auditors. It's great for accountants. And quite honestly, it's great for transparency.
We're going to get, in a few minutes, we're going to get into when you guys were doing that, some of the challenges and stuff. It's a phenomenal story, but let's get through the introductions first, Paul.
Yeah, my background is institutional capital markets and financial services, and that was my introduction to blockchain. And in that industry, there's a sort of natural expectation that you're retroactively chasing down exceptions, and there's a huge expense in the industry around that. And I saw blockchain at that time as an opportunity to proactively prevent those exceptions, actually do it accurately. And then my work with the GBA led me to working with, we're going to talk about the blockchain maturity model, but then as an extension of that, there was this interest, and Gerard asked to sort of proceed with looking at fraud, waste, and abuse. And really, distributed ledgers are about identifying or creating integrity and also corrupt evident records. And so therefore there's a real opportunity to ensure that things are done correctly, not just necessarily clear up the messes. And I think that's what drew me to it.
About 7 years ago, a friend of mine, a banker, called me and said, "Hey, have you heard about this magic internet money called ICO?" And I looked into that, and I immediately saw that what was happening was fraud with abuse, with stealing other people's money. So I respectfully declined. But the underlying technology fascinated me. And so I joined Government Blockchain Association with the hopes that that organization can actually bring accountability, transparency, order, traceability of every single dollar. So I represent at GBA a number of communities whose goal is, in part, remaining anonymous, to really contribute to the technological revolution in governance, which by and large is what we are seeing today. So an opportunity to help governments do that responsibly, transparently, was just too big of a thing to miss. So I joined, and I appreciate this opportunity, Gerard, very much.
Well, I became a licensed CPA in 1980, and as a CPA, you're always worrying about, the quality of the accounting data and making sure that things are being done right. And internal controls was always a huge part of what we do. And as I changed around in my career, I ended up in local government, and I've seen areas where local governments can do a whole lot better at what we do. And I've seen where there's been fraud, and I've seen where there've been waste, and I've seen where there've been confusion with the elected officials and generally with staff sometimes. And so that's been my focus. I actually came to Utah County as the budget manager, the first ever budget manager, to make sure that we had good, responsible budgets for our county. And I ended up in the GBA, kind of the military method. I was drafted by one of our commissioners, who actually was one of the strong leaders in this GBA movement here, Amelia. And she says, "Rudy, I need you to step up and join this GBA group and give a local government perspective to this paper that we're writing." And so I came on board, and wow, I've learned so much in the last 10 months or so. It's been awesome, and I'm looking forward to finding new ways where we can actually utilize blockchain to improve things that we do at the county, and so that we can make things more safe and that we can make things protected.
Excellent. All right. So we worked on this report for the last 10 months. Mike, you contributed a use case. So what I'd like you to do is go down and identify what was something you learned through going through the report. You just share, one of the lessons learned. And in your case particular, Mike, I think we learned a lot from your use case about this report. A lot is a lot about what doesn't work, right? And what some of those barriers are. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your use case so that, that is part of the report.
Sure. So our use case was, I explained that earlier. The unique thing I think that Gerard is alluding to is that I had friends over at the Department of Treasury who were performing a pilot to do grant payments on a blockchain. And when I saw that, the light bulb went off. There's been a question from Congress, interesting that we're sitting on the Hill, for years and years, of when a grant is dispersed or given out, awarded, who are the subrecipients on that grant? And it's a question I could never answer in all my roles, because there's a fiduciary responsibility that goes between the prime and the sub, and we don't have visibility into that. So when we came up with the idea for creating the blockchain that we had to do the pre-award risk assessment, we wanted to put that out on grants.gov, where federal grants are it's the find and apply, or the billboard for federal grants. We wanted to put that tool out on the grants.gov website so that sub-recipients, or I should say prime recipients, could do the same risk assessment that the government was doing on them on the sub-recipients. So it was fair, transparent, everybody understood the data that was there. We would then have our first look into the idea or the concept of who are the potential sub-recipients on any grant. Then the magic would happen. If Treasury had been successful with their pilot, and I think they were very successful. I think it was more cultural issues that stopped their pilot from going into a real live system. And you can read a few MITRE reports, they say that as well. But if Treasury had started doing disbursements on a grant blockchain, we could then tie those two blockchains together, and we could tell exactly who the subrecipients were, how much money they got, and then one day, hopefully, we could get into performance measurement, which is, I think, what everybody has been asking for the longest time. It's usually, what's the return on investment I have on the money that I'm putting out there? In the grants world, they like to say, what's the impact or the benefit? But we would have some vision, we would have some daylight into that scenario. And so when I came to Gerard and we started talking about this report, I said, I think that we need to be talking about the cultural issues and how we get around those in adopting emerging technology. And so that has really been, the crux of what I've been working on with this report.
So you don't have to mention anything specific, because I know this is somewhat of a public forum, but there were some real barriers to success, right? And culture. So just talk about those really quickly, and then I want to talk to Paul and some of the architecture stuff.
So I would say the first barrier is it's something new, and you're forcing something new on me. And I would like to say it was interesting because I was sitting in a room with a few of the representatives from operating divisions within HHS, and one gentleman stood up and he said, Mike, you're talking about doing all these archaic things. Why aren't you using something new, like, I don't know, AI, RPA, or blockchain? And I lit up. I said, you've given me the carte blanche to move forward on this project. Wasn't as easy as that. When we took we got an ATO on the system, and an authority to operate. And in the federal government, that's a big deal because it's a lot of time, money, and effort in order to do it. And we started using it, the risk assessment tool, to do COVID assessments because money had to move fast and we had the tool that you could do it. I want to say we took an 8-hour process down to under 15 minutes in most cases. It was a huge return on investment. I mean, massive. Risk adjusted, it was $142 million a year at HHS alone. But the interesting thing was, as soon as we turned it loose and we started letting people use it, then the holes were being poked in the system. Well, you don't have the paper 990s, which are, the tax filings for nonprofits, and other areas where we weren't giving them exactly what they wanted. We saw all that as a learning experience. And within weeks, because we were using Agile, we were adjusting. We were giving the users what it is they wanted. But there just kept being more and more excuses as to why they didn't want it. And as time went by, I realized the excuses weren't coming from the frontline users. The excuses were coming more from the middle management levels. And I think it was a change that they weren't comfortable with. And that is really hard to get past, especially when you have something that is so powerful, as I said, 8 hours down to 15 minutes. And honestly, if there were no issues, it was a 3-minute check and you were out of there. You were done.
It was really exposing, again, I don't want to get you in trouble, but I might. It was exposing that a lot of the grants that were being done before, everybody wasn't necessarily doing their due diligence, right? And that there were you guys uncovered some real holes that people didn't want uncovered.
Yeah, so Gerard brings up a good point. They were very subjective, all the risk assessments that were done. And to give an example, we went through risk questionnaires, and there were anywhere from 25 questions to 125 questions on a risk questionnaire that was going out to a recipient. We did a thorough analysis, and we found a 0% correlation between the questionnaire and realized risk. So when you start talking about burden reduction, which is what people want when they're working with the federal government, the old process is not a burden reduction. But that's just one example. There are plenty more.
There were lots. All right, I want to slip over to Paul. Paul, one of the things that we discovered in the report was about the fragmented, siloed systems, right? And the lack of accounting. So can you maybe talk a little bit about, from an architecture standpoint, what some of those lessons learned that we have out of the report?
Sure. At the end of the day, and this is, not necessarily exclusive to the government, but in large organizations, you tend to have different silos for different reasons, that end up developing their own systems that are then independently updated and reconciled. So the idea that they come together is either trying to have some massive centralization or some massive, circular communication, which is ultimately too hard a task to take on. What's interesting about distributed ledgers and blockchain is that they act as a synchronization mechanism because they are a common, like a Rosetta Stone middleware between multiple applications. And I think when we came to look at the report, and certainly some of the expertise for people within the government, you see the disparity in the systems, you see the silos, that therefore it's not necessarily deliberate, it's just a circumstance of the development and evolution independently over time. But blockchain and distributed ledgers have the opportunity to really bring these systems together and unify them. Again, I come from institutional capital markets, and again, in that industry, there's a huge amount of opportunity to get to real-time synchronization, and that's an opportunity that we also see within the government.
Eugene, so there's a lot of things you can talk about. We've gone on a lot of roads together. I know that voting in elections is an area where we talked about in the report and in the voting working group. What are some of the big lessons learned that you got from the report that you'd like to share?
Thank you. Thank you, Gerard. There are really three things I learned from this report. They all relate to voting in elections, but they have much broader implications. And those are the people, the process, and the software. With respect to the people, I learned the names of true pioneers of trying to bring in blockchain technology to governance. The report mentions multiple attempts by different people across different branches of government that tried to test, pilot, implement, review the use of blockchain technologies for the benefit of whatever they were doing. And I take my hat off to those people in appreciation. I learned also that the process of implementing was very, very different if you compare different branches of government to different specific initiatives. And I learned that that could be really hurting the process of implementation. And so as a response to that, I proceeded and wrote a book about that, which I will talk hopefully about at some point, which helps government officials and private companies have a single and standard approach towards governance and implementation of blockchain solutions. And in terms of software, my community has developed a tool, which again I'm hoping to talk about later, called Dache AI, which really helps any and all government official involved in this or any private company to do it in the best possible, secure, safe, transparent, and accountable way. Thank you.
Rudy, you're new to this process, right? And so maybe share a little bit about where Utah County is in its evolution process. By the way, Utah County has implemented blockchain for voting in elections and for vital records, right? And so Rudy's definitely give them a hand for sure. But Rudy's involved in another aspect, right? So Rudy, you want to just share a little bit about where Utah County is and what you've learned in the report?
Yeah, when I became the budget manager, we found out that there was one department in the county that was regularly running in the red, and that was our health department, a vital service that we are required to provide for our people. And so we started looking at different ways that we could figure out how, why is it going in the red? Why are we not making ends meet in there? And we were looking at a lot of things, and Amelia said, well, you know what? We should look at blockchain as a solution to this. And so I met with the people in the department, and they weren't real thrilled. Like kind of Mike said, they said, no, we don't have enough time to deal with any of this kind of stuff. But yet I looked at it and I said, well, one of the reasons why they don't have enough time is because they're spending too much time on things that could be easily automated. And that's when the blockchain light, if you will, went off in my head and said, wow, okay, I'm starting to see the benefits of this. Well, initially we were looking at doing the entire health department's revenues and expenditures on the blockchain. And as I met with them and looked at this, I thought, well, we're better off going in a small piece of it, because many times we try and go with the big piece, and what happens? The big piece goes and it just fails, right? So we said we're going to go with the small one. So we are focusing in on the grants and mostly the grants and the fees that we have with the county. One of the problems when you're dealing with a county is all of your revenues are fungible. Your general taxes, your property taxes, your sales tax, all that stuff comes in, and it's virtually impossible to track all of it. But when we're talking about grants, we can. And I'm on the other side of the world from where Mike was. Mike, coming from the federal government here, they're dishing things out and saying, well, the recipients, what are they doing with these funds? And the subrecipients, well, all of a sudden I realized, hey, we can actually take this down to the subrecipient level as well. And we can have this information. And once we get this implemented, the time that it took these people several hours to gather the data to submit for reimbursements on these grants and do all those things will be able to be done in minutes. And so I'm really excited. We're actually not fully implemented. We're in the process right now of working with a vendor where we're looking to bring this all on board. And we're in the stage right now where we're putting it all together so that we can make this happen with Utah County, because it would be a terrible thing if we don't get this done. And I'm the devious type at times. And once we get this little piece going with the grants, well, I could look at other areas within the county, like where we can utilize blockchain at even a higher rate. And it's, state of Utah, our county, we're really pushing for, identity protection, and blockchain's a great avenue for that. We got records, or, property records and our property tax records, all that kind of stuff. There's just lots of areas where we can begin to implement and utilize this to not only save us time, but also to protect our citizens. And being at the local level, that is key. We are there to protect our citizens and their assets.
Hey, thank you so much.
Gerard,
Yeah.
can I just throw out there?
Go ahead.
I didn't really answer the question, but Rudy summed it up. We're all facing similar challenges. And if you read through the report, you're going to see that, and you're probably going to relate to one of those challenges yourself, and you'll find some help.
Yeah, the report covers a lot of different things, right? With land titling, property titling, right? The Army's material command, right? Logistics, the Air Force and air mobility command. I'm trying to think about what others. There's a whole bunch. There's the Utah County. So if you read the report, and the report is going to be available in one of the tables outside after this session. But it goes through all of so many different examples of how the government's using blockchain successfully and unsuccessfully, right? And we talk about what the problem was, right? What this proposed solution was, and the actual or expected outcome. And then we also talk about barriers to adoption, and then ways to overcome it. I do want to switch over, and this is primarily for Paul and Eugene, because you guys have the most direct experience with this. When governments acquire blockchain solutions, right, there have been a lot of challenges and problems, right? The blockchain maturity model is intended to address that. So I'd love to hear from both of you guys. What is the blockchain maturity model, and how does a blockchain maturity model help governments acquire systems that are going to work?
So for those of you new to the GBA, the membership is very collaborative. And although we are solution providers or solution implementers or even consultants in the industry, the approach is to help the industry as a whole. And Gerard recognized in a group we were dealing with standards and certifications that there wasn't a means to assess solutions. If you were a solution buyer or a solution provider, you had no way to say, look, my solution has been assessed in some way. And that became the origin of trying, and Gerard's thankfully great experience in doing assessments and audits, that we, over a fairly extended period of time and quite a few Saturday mornings, all voluntary, we actually put together what became the blockchain maturity model, which was a means to assess blockchain solutions, regardless, public, private, applications in various industries. So we developed 11 elements that have to be assessed at 5 different levels of maturity. And it wasn't about who's the best blockchain solution. It was about, does your solution meet the requirements of your use case? And subsequent to that, we've also developed supplements for the various industries like healthcare, voting, identity, and banking and finance. But again, similar to the BMM, the report that we've generated has been a collaborative input from multiple people. And so the goal of the BMM is to help government assess the blockchain solutions so that they know what they're buying is going to meet the requirements.
Yeah, I would add a little bit to that great question. I think one of the greatest barriers that users face in general is the need to trust somebody. And blockchain actually has been designed, and the newest implementations actually offer that, to offer something where you do not need to trust anyone. It can be proven mathematically that you voted and your vote has been included in the final tally without us even being able to understand how you voted. So you don't need to trust any intermediaries. The same goes in many decentralized finance use case, etc., etc. So the BMM is a part of that removal of need to trust, which should help government entities and private companies which are in the process of evaluating which solution to use for their business purposes. How can we avoid trusting a vendor? Well, sending a vendor to go and get assessment based on the elements that Paul mentioned is a great way to reduce risk and to reduce your reliance on the need to trust anybody. I think that's the biggest thing that BMM brings in.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I'm just going to give a little additional context on that. The BMM is a pretty big subject. We had members come to us and they said, we're having a hard time selling blockchain to government and enterprise. Can you tell us why that is? And I said, yeah, it's because you're a bunch of drug dealers, human traffickers, and terrorists. And they said, yeah, but besides that, what's the issue? So we said, just like these guys said, there's no box to check in blockchain. In every other industry, there's cybersecurity certifications, there's program management certifications, right? There's quality certifications. There's nothing like that in blockchain. And these acquisition officials, they've heard of Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, and they've heard about rug pulls and crypto scams. And now we know about like IBM and Deloitte, right? They've been doing digital ledger technology for a long time, but this innovative thing that you're coming from an unknown company, we can't trust it. So that's why we've kind of created the blockchain maturity model. And what happened was when the United Nations found out about what we were doing, they came to us and they said, we have this group called the Internet Governance Forum. It's a multi-stakeholder organization. It includes Microsoft, Google, ICANN, Meta, MIT. These are the folks that actually govern the internet. And we have subgroups for all kinds of things, right? Financial inclusion, digital health, but they didn't have anything for Web3. So they asked the GBA if we would run the blockchain assurance and standardization on behalf of the United Nations Internet Governance Forum. And we said yes. And they said this BMM thing is a pretty cool thing. So now when we perform a BMM assessment, and Paul and Eugene's solutions are there. Now, if you go to the United Nations Internet Governance Forum blockchain assurance and standardization page, you'll see that these companies essentially are linked to that page. So that anyone in the world, if they're looking for solutions that can be trusted, right, they can essentially find blockchain maturity model assessed companies or solutions meeting these international standards. And this is what folks in government are now starting to look at and use. In fact, there's legislation being circulated. Our ultimate result is before anybody in government acquires a blockchain solution, it ought to be verified through some kind of solution, some kind of thing like the BMM. Right now, the BMM is the only thing like that out there. So that's just a little bit about the BMM. There, if you look in your program, there's a QR code to the BMM. Please get your tote bags on the way out. There's a flyer in there, and there are folks out in the hall that would be happy to talk to you about it. Guys, parting thoughts, right? We got about 8.5 minutes left. Any parting thoughts for these guys after coming through the whole report? Right? Any parting thoughts? And by the way, our next report we're working on is going to be on quantum AI and blockchain, right? Going towards the future. But guys, parting thoughts.
So the first thing I think about is the blockchain maturity model sets kind of a roadmap for everybody. Right now, there's a big push in the federal government for shared services. And one of the reasons why shared services, I've been around shared services for 25 years at least. One of the reasons they haven't panned out is because there's no way to assess one shared service and the value of what you're getting versus another shared service. Well, I look at the blockchain maturity model and you have a baseline of that value. You're able to say, does it meet my needs? And is it something that's compatible across the board? I think this is something we could use as a roadmap for shared services in the federal government, but I really do think that we've got to get on that path, and we've got to do it soon. And I love what you've done there. The other parting thought I will just share real quickly is when we went to get the authority to operate, people in our CIO's office said, well, how do we give an authority to operate to a blockchain? We've never done it before. And it was a very interesting question. So what we agreed to was it's a database. We're gonna give an ATO to a database, and then we're gonna come back in 6 months or a year, and we're gonna test the blockchain to make sure the blockchain is operating as you spelled it out in all your literature. Believe me, there's a lot of literature around getting an ATO, but we were able to move through, and we did go through one assessment, and the blockchain was performing as it was supposed to. So it was beautiful.
Thanks, Mike. Paul?
Most people don't know that in the original Bitcoin white paper, there are 3 articles that are referenced that are from Stuart Haber and Scott Stornetta. They actually created the first public blockchain in 1991, and we've all been fortunate that Scott Stornetta's played an active role in GBA events. I don't think he's here this time, but he's a really benevolent and interesting guy. And when I went to talk to him about my technology and my startup, he didn't give me any technical advice. He just bought me the book that's called Crossing the Chasm, which is the difference between early adopters and the early majority. And the chasm is because early adopters will always buy the next iPhone or get the next technology. But the early majority, you have the catch-22 where nobody wants to be the first. Now, as government employees and government representatives, you know from our report that people have dipped the toe in the water. You're not going to be the first, and you have the blockchain maturity model to tell you how to do it. So please join the blockchain world.
Yeah, I would add a few things to that in terms of takeouts. First, please come and join Government Blockchain Association. It's a great step to take. Second, please read the report that has been published to learn some of the successes, but also the failures that actually took place. And then look into the implementation avenues, which GBA can help with, and also the book that I referenced. And also, I suggest that you look at the most recent available solutions out there, which are being prepared with all of the information in mind of previous successful and unsuccessful attempts. So every day there is something coming out, and I will talk about some of them later today, that is worth your attention. So there's guidance, there's the organization that can help to reduce your risk and to help you do your job right. Thank you.
I remember many years ago when I was a much younger person, a campaign for president says no new taxes. No new taxes. Well, as a local government, we're right in the middle of that. Utah County is the fastest growing county in Utah and one of the fastest growing counties in the United States. And because of that, our costs are going up significantly. And our public says, hey, we don't want to pay more property taxes. We don't want to, even though we're the fourth lowest county in the state of Utah. They say we don't want any more. Well, blockchain is a solution to that because we'll be able to more fully account for where the revenues and the expenditures are going. And so that when we go to the people and say, hey, you know what, here are the numbers, they can say, you know what, these are real numbers. And we can say, well, gee, guess what? We cannot operate our sheriff's department on what it cost us 10 years ago. We just can't. I mean, since COVID, the vehicle costs have gone up almost 50%. You know, stuff like that happen all over the place. So we have to be able to stand by the numbers, and we have to be able to show the people what is really happening. And the blockchain is going to be one of those methods that we're going to be able to use to take care of this task and this responsibility, because we have a responsibility to our citizens in our counties and our cities.
So I'd like to thank all the members of the panel. I'd like to thank all the folks that have been building blockchain solutions. You'll be hearing about them throughout the day. Please remember to grab a tote bag on the way out. It's got all the information. And also in your program, there's some QR codes so you can connect with speakers there out after each of the talks. And Brian, I think we're ready to roll. Wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
And we're on time.
Yes.
I prioritize the GBA conferences because it's where real builders show up.
Technology is advancing at a rapid rate.
It's important that we're talking about blockchain right now because it isn't just a financial system, it's so much more.
In my mind, it's going to be the reason why we will remain the dominant superpower in the world.